back to the Catholic Challenge. I'm your host, Luke Lancaster. The next topic we're going to try and get into is the resurrection of Jesus. Did Jesus resurrect from the dead? And why do we believe that Jesus resurrected from the dead? What are our reasons? What are we grounding our faith in? All right, so let's build a case. Why do we believe that Jesus resurrected from the dead? I'll start with you, Candelaria. Why do you believe that Jesus Christ resurrected from the dead?
Well, first off, he definitely died. We know that. I mean, we have also a lot of historians that have said that even without being Christian. Because the Roman soldiers that crucified him, they would have been killed if they had let Jesus escape from the cross. So we know for a fact that he died. Another thing is that female testimony, it was considered unreliable in the first century. So the fact that they used this, they wouldn't have done it if they were trying to make something up. You know, if it were a myth or a story, they wouldn't have tried to make that up. And in the Gospels, the main eyewitnesses, especially when they first go to the tomb and they see him, they are female. So they wouldn't try to use female eyewitness being as unreliable as it was in the first century.
Yeah, the Gospels say that all these women saw Jesus come back to life, that they saw his body, or like Mary Magdalene is a very key figure, a prime witness that's recounted in the Gospels that saw Jesus in his resurrected glory. But if the Gospels had made that up, the Gospel writers had just made up that that Jesus came back to life, they would have made a story that was a lot more credible than what they just made. The fact that female testimony is considered unreliable is a huge point there. Like you would not put that into your story if you were making this up.
Yeah.
You know, because no one's going to believe you. They don't believe what females have to say during that time. You know, so that doesn't quite make any sense. And that Mary Magdalene, it says in the Gospels, had 7 demons cast out of her. Like, you want to talk about an unreliable testimony. Like, why would you include that in there?
Yeah.
So I think that's a solid reason to believe that they were telling the truth.
Yeah. And then thirdly, the apostles, they kept claiming it over time, and they kept saying it to the point of being tortured for their beliefs in the resurrection. They were martyred. They died for that. Again, nobody would do that for a practical joke or for, something like that. So there's more proof to the resurrection. They literally died and gave up their lives for that. So
yeah, if you just type in on the internet just the things that happened to the apostles, the 12 apostles. Traditionally, we say that there were 12 men that followed Jesus, and they claimed to have seen Jesus come back to life. And from the earliest church historian, Eusebius of Caesarea, he was writing in around the 4th century, so the 300s AD. He claims that what happened to the 12 apostles were pretty gruesome. Some of them were decapitated, boiled alive. Like Peter was crucified upside down. Like when they were being tortured for their belief in the resurrection, they could have said at any time, I didn't actually see Jesus resurrect. Like, don't torture me for this belief. I was making it up. I'm sorry, but I don't want to suffer.
Right.
But the fact that they held strong, all of them, that they all held strong to their conviction that they saw Jesus come back to life, and they were willing to be tortured for it, I think that's strong testimony to consider that they did, in fact, see what they claimed to see. Jesus came back to life.
Right. Yeah. So another thing was that if the resurrection was made up, the Gospels, why would they include the, embarrassing details about the eyewitnesses? Like he said, Mary Magdalene was possessed by 7 demons. Peter was called Satan, and he denied him 3 times. And the fact that the apostles were terrified and locked themselves in the upper room. So this is stuff that they said that they wouldn't make up if it were a fake story.
Yeah, if I was portraying myself in a story, I would have portrayed myself as I was proclaiming it to everybody, and I was seen as the most glorious person, and everybody basically worshipped the ground I walked on, and they were throwing red carpets for me. No, none of that is recounted in the Gospel. It's a very realistic story there, and if they were making it up, they would have gotten rid of all these embarrassing details in their accounts. The fact that Peter, the leader of the bunch, denied Jesus 3 times. He denied the Christian faith. When it also says in the Gospels that if you deny Jesus, Jesus will deny you. And so that's a really serious thing that Peter fell into, and they wouldn't have recounted that if they were making that up. Or the fact that they were all scared to death after Jesus died. Like, you would not portray yourself as a scared, like just a group of people that were terrified. Only Thomas had the strength to leave that upper room to go and maybe get food for them.
Right.
But when you read the Gospels, they were all terrified. They all were living together and tightly grouped because they were afraid of something happening to them once their master, their rabbi, had been crucified. So I think that's a strong point to consider, their testimony.
Yeah. So another thing is 1 Corinthians 15:4-7 says, "He was buried and he was raised on the third day in accordance with the scriptures, in that he appeared to Cephas, then to the 12. Then he appeared to more than 500 brothers at one time, most of whom are still alive, although some have fallen asleep. Then he appeared to James, then to all the apostles." So the Bible is saying that he appeared to 500 people. There's absolutely no way that they would, all, imagine it or whatnot, or they'd make that up. 500 people saw him. And I mean, eyewitnesses, the apostles, all of them, they saw him. I mean, he appeared to them. So.
Yeah, that's a huge point there, because St. Paul is writing to the Christians in Corinth, which is probably around Greece, and he's writing to the Christian community saying how 500 people saw Jesus come back to life, that he died, like Jesus died in a location that was easily seen by everybody. He died next to a road which the people would pass by all the time because he was crucified publicly. Right? So people saw him dying and ultimately die on the cross. But the fact that the fact that St. Paul can tell the Christians at Corinth, 500 people saw this. 500 people saw Jesus come back to life, be dead, and then come back to life. And many of them are still alive today. How could Paul write that? How could he write that, many of them are still alive, so just, go consult them. Like, how could he write that if that wasn't the case, if he was making that up? So yeah, that's a good point there. All right, so that's a lot of evidence, a lot of arguments to be made there for Jesus' resurrection from the dead. What about being Catholic? Well, we've established already a lot of points for believing in the Christian message, but why the Catholic message in particular? So I'll let you, Anna, handle that one. Why do you believe in the Catholic Church and not in any other church that follows Jesus?
Well, the Catholic Church has a form of authority, and why we know that this authority is the truth is because in the Bible, in Matthew chapter 16, verse 19, we read, "I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven. Whatever you loose on earth shall be loosened in heaven." And this is Jesus telling Peter that these keys are the ultimate authority, and right now I'm giving you these keys. So you feed my sheep, you have the authority now.
Yeah, so you're basically arguing for the papacy.
Yes.
Yeah, so that there is in fact an authority over the Christian community, over the kingdom of God, which of course makes sense. If you think of a kingdom, he didn't say it was a democracy of the kingdom of God or the republic of the kingdom of God or there's representatives. No, it's a hierarchical structure, and there is a king. And then the fact that he gives the keys of his kingdom, that Jesus Christ, the king of the kingdom of God, gives the keys of this kingdom to Peter, this implies something profound. It actually is implying something from the Old Testament, right?
Yes, in Isaiah 22:22, it implies that Peter was given the authority of the prime minister. And we read that it said that, "And on your shoulders I will place the key of the house of David, and you shall open and none shall shut, and what you shall shut none shall open." And also, we know that Peter, after he died, his successors for the papacy, it just goes down, and each pope has the keys and is the ultimate authority. And so this is something very big. So we know that ever since Jesus appointed Peter, that the pope has the keys. He's the ultimate authority.
Yeah, I think that's a huge argument there. So in Isaiah 22:22, the prophet Isaiah, hundreds of centuries before Jesus came on the scene, you quoted the verse from memory there, which is great, that it says in Isaiah 22, verse 22, that God will place the key of the house of David, not on the current prime minister, but on a new guy. So what that is implying is that in Isaiah 22, it describes the office of the prime minister, right? So there was, like we said, the kingdom, right? It's a monarchy type of structure. And so you have the king at the top, but he would have his right-hand man, the prime minister, the guy who would hold the keys to the kingdom, the keys to the palace. If you want to get into the palace, you want to see the king, you got to go find the prime minister, right? And he's the guy who will open the gates for you to enter into the presence of the king. And this was an office, the office of prime minister. So if the current guy who holds the keys dies, he'll have a successor. A new guy will take his place and hold the keys, who will then have the ability to open and shut. That's what Jesus is recalling when he says to Peter, one of the 12 apostles, followers, students of Jesus, Jesus says to Peter that he will give the keys of his kingdom. Right? He connected it with the kingdom. So that would indicate that Peter is going to have this office of prime minister, and he will have successors, and that is exactly what the Catholic Church says about the papacy, right? That he is, in fact, the representative of the king. In the Old Testament, the prime minister was the representative of the king. If the king left the people, if the king needed to go and fight a war against somebody else, the representative of him would be the guy who holds the keys, right? And so if that was the case in the Davidic kingdom, so it is in the case with the new covenant kingdom of Jesus Christ. So Jesus is representative because Jesus ascended into heaven. We no longer see him in the flesh. So his representative is Peter, but Peter died, so he had a successor. If you read the early Christians, they all said his successor was Linus. And so you have Peter, then Linus, and then Cletus, and then Clement, and it goes all the way down to our current 268th successor to Peter, Pope Francis. So we have an authority, and we have this authority structure where Pope Francis right now is the chief teacher or representative of Jesus on this earth. I love that point there when you said that Jesus gave Peter not only the keys of the kingdom, but the ability to bind and to loose. Binding and loosing was common in the first century. It was common knowledge to use binding and loosing for teaching authority. You could bind the people of Israel to, say, go to the Sabbath synagogue, doing that, or you could bind the people to avoid a certain type of food like bacon. So you could bind the people. If you think of binding like maybe a chain, like you're chained to something, you're bound to hold X, you're bound to hold Y, whatever it is. If the Jewish rabbis were able to do that, they could bind and they could loose. They could say, you know what, you don't have to do that anymore. You don't have to avoid pork. You don't have to avoid bacon. Or you don't have to avoid kosher. Jesus applies that language to Peter. So Peter is now the chief teacher. He can bind, and heaven will back him up. Whatever you bind will be bound in heaven. So whatever Peter binds will be bound in heaven. Whatever Peter looses, whatever Peter says is okay, heaven looses as well, and in fact has already loosed. Right? So heaven and Peter are working together in their teaching, and so if that's the case for Peter, and Peter has successors, that's where we get this idea of papal infallibility, that we can in fact know what God has revealed. Right? We can have an interpreter of divine revelation, so unite us all as followers of Jesus. All right, so that's a really solid argument there for the papacy, for the Catholic Church. We've covered a lot. We've covered evidence for God, the soul, Jesus' existence, the Old Testament and archaeology. We've covered the genre of the Gospels, the authorship of the Gospels. We also covered the manuscript evidence and oral tradition, how that's really reliable. We have arguments for the resurrection of Jesus, and then finally we had the authority of the Catholic Church, the papacy. All right, so we've gone through a lot of evidence today. I thank you guys for joining me, and I thank you, the listener, as well. Tune in next week to the Catholic Challenge, Wednesday at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and I'll see you then.